Your time's up.
Jeremy made a subtle mistake, I think. When you said it was a 45-second plenary session, oh, I see, I understand. That apparently was a joke, which, hi, I'm Jim Popham, and I'm very pleased to be here today. When Stuart Kahl, who organized this session, and contacted Mary Ann and me, and asked us to speak on this particular topic, I was delighted to do so. Because we just heard three governors talk frequently. A theme that was running through their remarks was the call for facts and for evidence. And it seems to me that this particular session, dealing with educational assessment, even though you don't know it, is going to deal with the most important topic of this forum. And the reason is that educational assessment does, in fact, create the evidence, the facts, on which many of these policy decisions you're going to be talking about will be made. So it's a really important arena. And for me personally, it's something, recently I've had to think back. I've had a long career in education, and I'm often asked, well, you know, when you started, Jim, schools were just coming into fashion way back then, but when you started, schools in America were regarded with more positive esteem than they are now. Or what is the difference? And I've really had to think what the problem has been in American public schooling. And oddly enough, I would identify it as the mistakes we have made as a function of misunderstanding educational assessment. I really think it is assessment ignorance that has led us to make significant mistakes in the way we operate our schools, and I think that'll come up later on today. Well, when Stuart contacted me and said, would you do this, would you be willing to be a panel moderator and a panelist in addition, he said, essentially, wear two hats. And I agreed because his organization was supporting my travel expenses. And so what I decided to do was indeed be a little more literal. I would wear two hats. This hat will be my moderator hat. Whenever you see me wearing this, I will be functioning as a nonpartisan, careful, even-handed moderator. On the other hand, when I wear this hat, which I bought yesterday at the airport, it's a St. Louis, Missouri hat. This was designed to suck up to local attendees in case there are any people out here from the area, St. Louis. Anyway, when I'm wearing this hat, I will be a panelist. So, again, what our plan is for this particular session is for us to each take 5 minutes or so to give our views on what we think is particularly important related to the general arena of educational assessment and becoming more knowledgeable about it. And after 5 minutes each, then we'll have an open discussion. We talked on the phone beforehand on a couple of occasions to try to get ready for this session. And what we agreed to is 3 general foci. I took 5 years of Latin, tried to use the plural at least once a month, and this takes care of this one. And these 3 foci were going to be the role of educational assessment in the evaluation of teachers and whether it's being done properly. The use of educational assessments to evaluate schools. We've been doing a lot of that over the years, and it's intensified now. And finally, the potential for formative assessment, that is classroom assessment, a part of a process to improve the caliber of kid learning, what teachers are teaching, how students are learning stuff, via formative assessment, that process. Those are the 3 general topics we thought most important to discuss today. And as Jeremy just introduced in his 3-second introduction, we are going to have a session afterwards, a breakout session, where those of you who are interested in pursuing those can follow up. So I guess I'd like to start with asking Stuart to tell us for 5 minutes or so what you think is kind of important.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Does anybody wonder why I asked Jim to be the moderator here? I think it's pretty clear. And the hat is particularly appropriate because with these bright lights, it really cuts down on the glare. And
This glare is that?
That's right. In any case, I've known these guys for many, many years, and First time I started learning from Jim was probably at an ECS conference, the old Boulder Large-Scale Assessment Conference in the mid-'80s, the mid-'70s when they started, and I viewed him as one of the knowledgeable elderly experts at that time, and that was almost 40 years ago. So I view him as the grandfather I never knew. In any case, we're here to talk about assessment literacy, and this is a hot topic of mine in the last years because my encounters with legislators and educators, general public, I've just come to the conclusion that the status of of assessment literacy in this country is really horrible. It's depressingly low. And I talked to somebody a couple weeks ago who said the reason is people don't perceive it as a problem. And the reason they don't perceive it as a problem is because everybody was a student. Everybody took tests. And you get 16 right out of 20 questions, and you get an 80. So you get a score of 80. You can average the scores across all the students in a group, and you've got an average score. What more is there to know about testing and about assessment? And the trouble is there's tons more. And we see that lack of understanding of assessment issues emerging time and time again, sometimes as a result of some policies that might not have been the best informed policies, and just this general lack of understanding of a lot of assessment issues. And so it's a real concern of mine. With respect to one of the three topics we talked about, teacher effectiveness evaluation, I do have some concerns. For funding from federal programs, I think everybody is aware that there's this requirement that student growth, student achievement be counted heavily. I think significantly was a term that was used. And I think that's fine. I think it's a reasonable expectation that teachers can show that their students have learned something. That's their job, to facilitate learning. On the other hand, what I also see, though, is that requirement for federal funding translated into the mention of, not the mention, but the requirement of specific weights. 50% is going to be counted, or student achievement is going to count for 50% of a teacher's evaluation. Now, I don't mind the idea that it counts or weighs heavily, but in my mind, as soon as you get to mentioning a specific percentage, that means there's going to be this formulaic approach that quantifies all the other measures, adds up, you multiply by the weight, you add them up, you get a figure, and that rules the day. And that concerns me a great deal. The evaluation of employees in any field, in my mind, with a few exceptions, is a human judgment by an immediate supervisor. And we'll probably talk more about issues around the evaluation of teachers, but that's certainly where I'm coming from, not just in teacher evaluation, but in other aspects of education where we're trying to train kids to think more deeply, to use higher order thinking skills and so on, and at the same time, we're trying to remove human judgment from decision making, and I think that's a big mistake. In terms of assessment programs to assess the quality of schools and school instructional programs and so on. We're moving in some good directions right now. I really think we are. I think the Common Core is a good thing. I think the focus on higher order thinking is a good thing. I do worry, there are lots of programs beyond those that the states engage in. And I am concerned that people, again, have faith in human judgment because we are always going for the efficient, quick, multiple choice, machine scored, and at the same time, to get at some of these higher order skills, I think you have to rely on other approaches, performance assessment, other forms of non-multiple choice. Multiple modes of assessment can contribute, and that's why we have to go with a balanced approach. But I think when we focus on as we have as a result, I think, of some legislation a few years ago, and getting that quick turnaround for the parental choice decisions, I think we sacrificed some of the kinds of programs that really address some of those skills that we can't do readily with efficient measures. I'll stop there and finish my last thought a little later. I'm looking at the clock here, and I'm doing fine.
Thank you, Stuart. Let's hear from Jim now. Thanks, Jim. I have been looking forward to this session, frankly, more since we had a phone call conversation with ECS staff. We had a conference call talking about what we were doing, and they suggested, among other things, one of the things we could do as panelists was to frame our content in a manner that would be bill-ready talk. Prepare something that you could use, and all of a sudden, it struck me in the intervening weeks that in this audience there are people who could make a difference in a way that I hadn't thought of before. And let me explain. The three of us talked about what we would say in our 5 minutes with you at the beginning, and then we'll interact along the way. But I was going to deal with 3 topics. One, I was going to push very hard for formative assessment. That particular process has just tons of empirical evidence as well as anecdotal experience to say that it works, it helps kids learn, and we don't use it as much as we should. And so I was going to be pushing very hard for that. I was also going to be advocating something I think my colleagues may not, and that is to measure kid affect, that is students' attitudes, their interests, their values. You can do this very effectively now with the use of anonymous self-report inventories that don't give you a fix on an individual kid, but as a group provide for you a very nice notion of the extent to which students are being, for example, interested in reading or feeling confident as learners. So I was going to be pushing those 2 things. And the third topic I was going to deal with is instructional sensitivity, or more accurately, the ability of a test to distinguish between well-taught and badly taught kids. And that was going to be my top. But that's my whole thing right now. I've got about 3 2/3 minutes left, and I want to emphasize that one more than anything because I think it's the most important thing that we face right now in the area of educational assessment. Let me be very candid. We have made an enormous number of mistakes in this country in judging the quality of schooling because we have used the wrong tests for that purpose. Tests that were designed way back as early as World War I, not World War II, World War I to provide comparative score interpretations, to let you say that Johnny scored at the 87th percentile and Billy scored at the 33rd or whatever it is, and that test works fine for that purpose. Those tests, although they do a good job for that function, do not necessarily gauge the caliber of instruction. And now we have, and Stuart mentioned it, now we have a real emphasis on teacher evaluation in this country. We continue to have a very strong emphasis on how we evaluate schools, and yet we are using, I submit to you folks, the wrong tests. We are using tests for which there is no evidence that they actually provide a clear picture of the extent to which children have been badly taught or well taught, because they weren't built that way. They were built a different way. Okay, now why is Jim excited about talking to you about this? Because you could change that. Some people sitting in this room right now at state legislative level could install, supplement some of the recent state laws regarding teacher evaluation, could append those laws by simply adding a sentence such as the following. This is this bill-ready language. Tests used for evaluative functions in our state, that means to evaluate teachers, principals, or schools, tests used for this evaluative function must be accompanied by evidence indicating the extent to which they are appropriate for that purpose. If you had that particular proviso in statute right now, let me submit to you that there would be no test in this country judged suitable for judging the quality of schooling. And yet we are judging our teachers dominantly, significantly, on the basis of kid performance. So here's the chance for you to make a difference. Now, it doesn't say how they have to produce this evidence. It doesn't say what the tests have to be. All it says is show us the evidence that these tests are suitable, that is, can yield valid inferences about the extent to which kids have been well taught. You could make that difference. You could change that. What do you think, Mary Ann?
Well, it's appropriate that I'm sitting in between these 2 gentlemen because oftentimes in my role, I literally have to translate between research, higher education, and work with testing companies and try to put things into practice. And in Rhode Island, I was the assessment director for about 10 years, and that was filled with controversy at every turn. So my commissioner said to me, I'm going to give you a break. Please design our ed eval system. So, thank you. Thank you so much. So I brought that perspective to this work, and I thought if I have you all as an audience, the kinds of things that I want to talk about, because the last 4 years as a race to the top state have been incredibly challenging for Rhode Island, but also incredibly exciting. And the things we've learned, the areas that I am more sure of what needs to be done in our state, I feel strongly about, and I'm just happy to be able to talk about that with you. As a State Department employee, and I've been there for 27 years after many years of teaching, I find that our role is often as translator. We are translating legislation into guidance, or we're translating research into practice. And when the subject is assessment, when nuance and detail and specificity are so critical to that work, we often fumble a lot. And I think those are the mistakes that Jim was talking to you about. So we know that there's compelling evidence that says formative assessment is one of the most powerful tools to change student performance in classrooms. What that has been translated to, at least in our state, is the purchasing of online item banks and kids sitting in front of computers taking multiple choice tests every 4 weeks to check in a formative way. That's not what we had in mind, but that was a translation, and we want to take that back, and we're working with teachers to do that. When we talked about EdEval, we said that, and again, there's compelling evidence to say that teachers have the strongest impact of in-school factors on student performance. So of course you want to capture student learning as part of your evaluation system. Well, what that's translated into is the dropping in of many more tests into classrooms. And everyone, we're feeling that backlash nationally right now. Parents are fed up, kids are fed up, teachers are fed up, saying, give us the room and the space to teach. All we do is test. So we're in a bit of a conundrum right now with all of the policy movements, because we need to be accountable. We need to make sure that we're spending our resources wisely, that we're implementing programs that do in fact make a difference, and that we are taking care of our most fragilely academic kids to make sure that they are not getting lost in this maelstrom. So we need assessment tools and strategies to do that thoughtfully. But we're not there yet for sure. So in Rhode Island, we're using our teacher evaluation system as a way to start talking about assessment literacy. And to bring information into teachers' hands. But what we need is we need policy room to not get this absolutely perfect in the early years. So our work is a little bit messy, and right now we have the policy space to do that, and we are really appreciative of that. So we have student learning objectives as part of our work, and student learning objectives require teachers to be able to say, based on whatever course or grade I teach, what's the most important thing kids should know in order for them to be well prepared to go on to the next level? How am I going to know that they've reached that level of performance? And what kind of progress should I expect for every child that it's in my care for this year? 3 pretty simple questions. And our teachers are really struggling with all of us to answer them well, so that we can take that information and put them into a student learning objective. Because we don't want to introduce more tests into our system. We want to take the work that our best teachers are doing. One of them is here with us today, Jessica Waters from Rhode Island. We want to take the kind of work that our best teachers are doing and build that and develop that and nurture that, so that is reflected in all of our classrooms. And it's more of an organic way to inform our educator evaluation process. Now, it's not perfect. I can't say with any assurance that an SLO in one teacher's classroom is comparable to another teacher's classroom, and that the level of rigor is absolutely perfect right now. But it's an effort worth undertaking. And so, in my time with you, I want to talk to you about what we need to do as a country to do that well and thoughtfully, and to make sure that we have the policies and the legislation and the research base in order to get that work done.
Let me ask you, we've used, the 3 of us have used assessment literacy in one way or another in our remarks. I doubt if people understand exactly what each of us mean. What do you mean by this assessment literacy, either one of you?
I'll start if you like, okay. It's interesting you should ask, because one of my concerns about the status of assessment literacy among educators has to do with the standards for teachers, standards for teacher education programs, teacher tests, all of which give really inadequate attention to assessment. And basically what we see when there is something relevant to assessment in those standards is always what we all value, the use of assessment results in making decisions. But as one of my colleagues often mentions, people seem to think that the data just fall out of the sky, that there's no attention to what makes good measures, what's good measurement to collect good data that you can use for effective or for appropriate decisions. And so to me, it's really the ability or capability, proficiency, whatever, to create or select good measures, to understand why, understand the differences among measures, as well as the use of the data, which means understanding a lot about what's under the hood. There's a lot of talk about different types of assessment, adaptive assessment, fixed assessment, so on, and yet very few people understand what's under the hood, and I don't expect folks in all walks of life to understand the psychometrics of it all, but at the same time, a better understanding of, a little bit deeper understanding of what's under the hood would make a difference in decisions that are made about assessment programs. So to me, those are the key ideas, the ability, again, this is more at the teacher level, to create or identify good measures, and then also the idea of interpreting results, which means an understanding of those measures, and using them to affect decision making.
You buy into that, Marianne?
I do, and I think when we think about assessment literacy, I think there are at least three groups for which I think there's a different level or different focus on assessment literacy. One is for policymakers. I think there's a certain amount of assessment information you should know about in order to inform the work that you do. The second is for the community, for parents, families, for kids themselves to know how to think about assessment. And then thirdly would be for practitioners, teachers and administrators. And I think that we don't need to make a lot of psychometricians across the country. We have enough of those. But I think right now assessments are controlling teachers rather than the other way around. And so I think teachers need to have enough information under their belt. We have to build up their confidence so that they're clear about the purpose for which they are using an assessment, and they select the right measurement tool in order to do that. And right now we get a lot of force fits or misfits, and people are, with good intent, giving kids lots of tests, and they're getting lots of information back, but they're not using the information because the information isn't answering the question that they had in the first place. And so I think we need to deepen that understanding, and when we do that, what we're really doing is deepening teachers' understanding of teaching and learning, of exactly what got them into this business. So I agree with that.
I like your distinction of the levels, that the magnitude, if you will, of what a person needs to know about assessment, because I don't want people in this room to be put off by something that seems so esoteric and foreboding that it's beyond their ken, because the reality is, if for a policymaker, you need to understand only a modest number of very significant concepts or procedures that make a difference in the decisions that you make. And that's very different than what a teacher might have to know. I guess the reason I feel so strongly about our topic today is I was never trained in measurement. I went to a doctoral program at Indiana University, didn't take a single course in measurement, didn't care a damn about it.
That explains a lot.
And the comment about we have enough psychometricians, I would argue that it's just maybe we have a few too many. The truth is, I never thought measurement was all that important until much later in my career, and we began to have high-stakes tests in this country, and all of a sudden what was on the test made a difference to what was in the classroom, and my career shifted. And so I spend a lot of time writing about this topic now, not because it's where I started, but because I think it is the single most important determiner of what transpires in a classroom. And I'm really delighted we're talking about it today, and I just want you all to recognize there aren't all, I wrote a book for school administrators in which I tried to identify key constructs that you had to know about assessment. You know, everything a school leader needs to know about assessment. I ended up with only 20 things. If I were talking to a policymaker, I'd have 15. There's not that much stuff to it. I just wrote a book about evaluation of teachers. It came out last month. And it's one of these books that if you read, not only will you understand about evaluating teachers, but it will promote a happy afterlife. I mean, it is a powerful book, no question about it. And you know, there's some stuff on the tables about those kinds of books. I guess it's really important for all of us in this room to understand about assessment. As Stuart said early on, because we were all tested, because many of us made tests as teachers, you know, we think we know that game. We don't know that game. And for me, the point that I made earlier, and the one that's most crucial, is the tests we are using to judge the quality of our schools, our teachers, our administrators. Those tests have no evidence, not one lick of evidence, to support their legitimacy for that purpose. And if you realize if you're using the wrong test, you make the wrong decisions. If you have the wrong evidence, you make the wrong decisions, how crucial that is. And there are people in this room right now who could help fix that. So there. What else have you been thinking about recently, Stuart?
Well, where do I start? Let's start with I'm thinking of the gubernatorial candidates in one state many years ago who all expressed a position on the state testing program. And basically it was the same position pretty much. It was saying we're going to scrap our existing program and replace it with a testing program that is summative, interim, formative, adaptive, and tells the teacher what they're going to do tomorrow. And I wrote this piece on that tongue in cheek. And then I received a bunch of requests for proposals. That's how we do our business. We respond to state requests. And saw that kind of language in there. And it was appalling to me because there's this expectation that any one test can do so many different things. I'm not saying you can't do more than one thing, but at the same time, it's a stretch. And that desire for the immediate results, for example, is one that had a dramatic impact on the nature of tests, state testing programs. I mentioned the parental choice decision. Well, an awful lot of programs dropped their constructive response, dropped performance components, went with all multiple choice testing. And there's a lot of research about the impact on instruction of over-reliance, totally on multiple choice formats. The impact on instruction. Teachers emulate in their own testing the measures they see that they're held accountable for. And so I believe firmly that teachers, as a result of that, teachers of the past decade, see student work a lot less. And it's just appalling to me that's the case. Mary Ann mentioned the multiple choice item banks that are computer-generated tests. They generate the number, and they get those numbers into the electronic grade book. And you go into a school and you talk to your kid's teacher, and they pull out a printout of a full sheet of paper of all the grades and scores that were awarded. So I guess the point is you got to think about the impact of the programs, and I'm not so sure that's always on folks' minds, at the policy level. And I think that's important, and that's an understanding. I think the notion of the immediate results, when you're given a summative statewide assessment end of a year, that's a general assessment covering a broad domain. And to think that there's much in there to inform the teacher about what they're going to do the next day or the next week or whatever is kind of foolish. Those programs provide very valuable information for program evaluation, for making improvements in the program the following year to reach that next group of kids passing through the grades and so on.
Do you really think they do, Stuart?
I'm sorry?
Do you really think those summative assessments do indeed provide information which is useful for next year's modification? Because I can show you a whole bunch of them that don't. I mean, they will give you results reported as strands. Now, there was There's never been anything created on human to conceal meaning more than a strand. You report results at a strand. What on earth is a strand? Well, it has a whole bunch of stuff in it, and you don't know what they really are. So do you really think they help that much?
I knew I couldn't slip that one by you. In our programs, yes.
Oh. Well,
So, okay.
I mean, let's be candid. There's a difference between test development organizations, and some are more attentive to instructional concerns, and some are less attentive. The vast majority, and I think measured progress is an exception, and they're not paying me to say this, the vast majority of testing organizations in this nation are more concerned with traditional test development, which has as its chief focus providing comparative score interpretations, and not necessarily supplying evidence that teachers can use next year to act on.
Yeah. So, I do want to say one point there, that I think these programs, you have to think, in any testing program at any level, should raise questions. They don't provide all the answers, they raise questions. And so why did this subgroup this year perform poorer than that subgroup? Why, compared to other places in this area, did we do a poorer job than that group, or a better job, or whatever? It seems to me it's in answering those questions that you get the information that contributes to the improvement of the program.
As long as you raise the question at an actionable grain size, and many do not. You were going to say something else.
Well, no, I'm just thinking that from a state perspective, we have limited resources. We have so much money to spend on testing. We have so much time in a school year to dedicate to testing, and we have so much time to work with kids to get them done. So it's really important that we are absolutely clear about what we're aiming toward, because I don't think that any tests are not going to solve all of our ills, but they can certainly help us frame the conversation and make decisions about how to use those other resources more wisely. And I think right now we're getting a lot of pushback saying that we're spending too much money on testing in our state. And so we looked at, what have we paid measured progress in the past umpteen years? And what it comes out to is about 17 cents for every $100 spent in our state on education. 17 cents. And that has bought us a lot. That has bought us a test that is 50% constructed response and 50% multiple choice in science, literacy, and mathematics. Now, what we haven't done is we have not done as good a job of using that information. We haven't framed it well, and we haven't helped districts think about how that test and that information sits into a larger set of data and information. And that's the work that we're doing now. So in Rhode Island, we have a comprehensive assessment system guidance document that talks about, at the local level, what do you need? Because our kneecap test, our state test, is not going to provide everything. It's not going to solve every ill. But it's an important component among others. And I think that's where we need to end. That's where we can really drive the conversation and help people make better use of our resources, rather than just developing more tests or introducing more tests.
One of the places those tests are coming into intense scrutiny these days are in connection with teacher evaluation. Now, we spoke on the phone. We had dinner last night. Teacher evaluation becomes a prominent concern. Now, almost all of you know that is a function of two federal initiatives, the Race to the Top program and the ESEA flexibility program. Many states around the nation have either revised or installed brand new teacher evaluation programs that are clearly designed to be more rigorous, where, as Stuart said earlier, a significant factor in the evaluation of teachers is to be student growth, and in many instances, states in this room have had legislatures enact requirements that student growth constitute a minimum proportion of the evaluation of a teacher, for example, 50%, 30%, and so on. This is big stuff. Now, I guess my personal view is, if we do this teacher evaluation thing right, it could be remarkably beneficial not only for the field, teachers in general, but for kids. But if we do it wrong, it can be really bad. You know, we've criticized the terrible things that happen in the classrooms, curricular reductionism, too much test teaching and so on, when we were evaluating schools. Now we're evaluating an individual teacher. And can you imagine the motivational impact of trying to get a good evaluation? So if we get this thing wrong, it can really corrupt us, and that's why I want to turn, I guess, to you, Stuart. You were sensing that was an area of real concern to you.
Yeah, the right test is one thing. It's certainly not enough. And I think we've heard horror stories of events. I think the value added, there's lots of folks who have expressed concern about value added. And I want to go back to the start. I believe a teacher's job is to facilitate learning. And we ought to be able to see that that is being accomplished. At the same time, what we do with the information is the real issue. And I think value added, sure, do the computations, come up with the value added possibly, but recognize that there is no comparability in value added scores across teachers. Somebody, I think Ed Hartle, a psychometrician from Stanford, said that value added scores are not context independent. And basically, there's so many factors that impact those things, whether it's a group of students being taught in a particular year, whether it's support from the school, whether it's a whole bunch of other factors, the nature of the test, the curriculum, how much growth is expected in 5th grade math versus 6th grade math or something. So the way you deal with that comparability, in my mind, is get the information and make data-informed decisions. This is a term I think Doug Christensen from Nebraska used years ago, data-informed decisions that are human judgment as opposed to data-driven decisions where the numbers rule the day.
But when you're talking about, value-added statistical methodology, the first thing I think is, what is the test? What if you have a test that's sitting there that was designed primarily to differentiate among test takers, where test items have been deliberately included that will yield maximum variation among test takers, and it happens that those items are also highly correlated with socioeconomic status or with kids' inherited smarts when they were born. And what happens if you use a test that from the get-go isn't right for the purpose, and then you subject it to all sorts of statistical machinations that somehow is supposed to make it produce an indication of a teacher's quality? That seems so wrong-headed. Yes?
So the other perspective is if you do have a test that is constructed thoughtfully. So, I would posit that ours is, that we have every item is reviewed for bias and sensitivity. Every item is, we bring panels of teachers across 4 states together to look at every item and answer several questions. Is it aligned to the standard? Is it developmentally appropriate? Is it taught in that year? Is it going to be instructionally sensitive? So we did all that work.
Whoa. Let me catch it.
Okay.
You really asked them whether if this is taught well,
Yes.
the kids will get it right.
I don't know if that it's framed that way, but I will send you the rubric that we use for teachers to look at the item. I don't want to.
Well, the reason we're quibbling about this, and we quibbled over dinner last night when she stole my last roll. We quibbled. The reason is because when you have teachers review items to say if they are aligned to a curriculum aim, that's a good thing to do, nothing wrong with that, but that's not the same thing as saying if a teacher teaches the curricular aim, is it likely the kids will get this item right? And I doubt very much if you've done that. You send me the rubric and show, and I'll send you an apology letter.
Okay. So I'm saying we've got a test that I think is a good test to be used for this purpose. And we don't use value add, but we're using the growth model. And I would even take what Stuart is saying, and might a teacher have variation from year to year? And a lot of teachers who have pushed back on us saying you can't use a growth model because they're not stable enough. One year I might be a 48 and the next year a 55. And I would say, you're right. There is some amount of variation from year to year. But there are things that you can do in policy to mitigate those risks. And so what we've done is we've studied our growth data 7 ways to Sunday. We've looked at it just teachers with special ed teachers, and then we've looked at special ed teachers with different proportions of kids with IEPs in their caseload. And we did all that kind of work to make sure that is it possible for you to be a teacher with high growth scores, moderate growth scores, and low growth scores. So we made sure that our test and our teachers were showing differences, and they are. The other thing that we wanted to make sure is that when we put cut scores to that we were thoughtful about that. So for now, we have very cautious cut scores. Teachers and growth scores are only used as a very small portion of the overall body of evidence. And you can have a high growth score, a moderate, or a low growth score. Now, to get a low growth score, your 2 years worth of kids, the median score has to be below 30. That's really, really low. It's probably not where I would want it, because if you're a student that's struggling and your teacher is getting most of her kids to a growth score below 30, you're almost giving them a death sentence of low performance. Their trajectory is really in jeopardy. But right now, we want to make sure that we are protecting individual teachers while we're learning about building this system over the next several years, that we're being really cautious before we would ever say a teacher's growth score is in that low range. I think that's where research and testing and policy can all come together in a way that makes sense, so that we're not, when Jim says the test isn't good enough, or Stuart says, I worry about value-add scores, they're both right, but they still can be used if they're used in a very cautious and thoughtful manner, and you're analyzing your data and you're making improvements every year. And I'm afraid that sometimes we get so paralyzed, so afraid that we can't take a step forward and learn together. And I think...
And that's where I'd want to use human judgment. If for example, you sound like your test is dramatically different and better than a test in other settings. I would like well-trained, thoughtful people to say, in this situation, those tests should count more than they would in this other state where they just kind of select it off the shelf and don't do much with it. So teacher evaluation is a game in which human judgment has to play a prominent role.
Absolutely.
We're getting close to the end of our time together, folks. And I was going to ask you to say one final thing about your views on this important topic for our audience.
Well, I'll say two things, but I'll get it in time, yeah. Because I wanted to respond a little bit about the teacher effectiveness one more time, in that we hear a lot about growth score, multiple measures. You know, multiple measures are very important, and people are talking about observations and surveys and from teachers, from students, the support from the schools, all kinds of measures. What I don't hear enough of, I think, is the artifacts. I'm going to get to formative assessment in this, maybe, possibly. But in any case, I want to see, if I'm a principal, I want to see the students, or excuse me, the teachers' work. I want to see the tests. I want to see their lesson plans. I want to know that they've intentionally built in formative assessment activities. I want to see that they're following their lesson plans, but I also want to see their tests. I want to see their measures. Both the informal measures, possibly for formative assessment, as well as their summative measures. I want to see the nature of those. I want to see what they do with the information from those. I want to see what the feedback is that they give the students. And so all of that is in my mind, equally as important as a lot of the measures. So I think artifacts are real important. So the last thing I want to say is kind of a repeat of the other. There's so many areas in assessment where we just, whether it's the scoring of student work, whether it's teacher effectiveness evaluation, decision-making by the teachers in terms of using the data, we've got to trust human judgment more. And we're trying to reduce that need for human judgment, and we can't do it.
Great. Mary Ann?
I think that this is an incredibly important topic, clearly one that I'm passionate about, and I think we're at this pivotal time in our country. I think we're on the cusp of incredible change on behalf of kids, and I just hope that we continue to have this conversation going forward, that it's not the topic du jour and then we forget about it and move on, which we get accused of doing an awful lot. So I'm just looking forward to continuing to think about collectively how we use assessment to inform what we do in our schools.
Great. And we will have a follow-up for those of you who are interested in probing this more. And I guess to make the point doubly important, I'm going to wear both hats this time. And my last question for you is, if you have to choose one thing to mess with, this topic is pretty overwhelming. We all agree it's important. But if there's one thing you could do to make a difference, it's to get the right test being used to supply the evidence. Right test, right evidence, better decisions. The current test, wrong test, bad decisions, that can be changed, and you can help change it. And now Jeremy is standing by, about to hover and come to the podium.
Thank you very much. That was one of the best 45-second plenaries we've had so far in the forum. Special thanks to Jim and to Mary Ann and to Stuart for sharing that information with us. And again, they will have a concurrent session that's going to begin in 10 minutes. That's going to be a follow-up to this. As you depart from this ballroom, please head to one of the 6 concurrents